myself, I guess. First of all, my name is Joshua Petty Case. I use he, him pronouns. I'm based out of Southwest Ohio here in Cincinnati. I am on the leadership council here for Ohio Equal Rights, but then I also locally serve on a lot of different boards and do a lot of advocacy, especially around disability and LGBTQ plus advocacy here in the city of Cincinnati and the state. And so happy to be here. And I will kick it off to, I think, Sumac.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Sumac. I am the Columbus representative on the Ohio National Lawyers Guild Board. I'm a recent law school graduate waiting for my bar exam results, and my specialty is in criminal defense. So I'll be talking about the law behind protest rights. And I'll hand it off to CJ.
Hi everyone, my name is CJ. I'm a librarian at University of Akron. I'm part of the NLG Education Committee. I'm not a lawyer, but I have taken some classes on intellectual property, so that's kind of my tie-in, but I'm going to be talking about Senate Bill 1 today and higher education freedom.
And then I think Lise.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Dr. Lise Regula, co-chair here at Ohio Equal Rights. I use the pronouns he, him, and his series. I'll be speaking on briefly the reproductive rights and I'm making sure to keep the right hat on at the right place, but I am part of the board of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio, which gives some great larger scale understanding of stuff that's going on, thanks to Danielle Fursick and others over there.
Thank you, everybody, for their introductions and some a couple of logistics things. We do have Amberly, who's from the Cincinnati State ASL Interpreter Program, on the call as well for interpreting for us. And so hopefully everyone that needs those services can see Amberly properly. If not, and you have any issues, please feel free to reach out to Lise or myself or the Ohio Equal Rights individual that's on the call, and we can make sure that we work through any of those issues there. There is also a show captions option here on Zoom that you can always click the button of as well, so that way, if you need captions, that's available to you. So to start off, I think we're kicking it off to CJ first for the first section here on academic freedom and Senate Bill 1.
Oh goodness, it was working for me. Oh, here we go. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? I'm here to talk about Senate Bill 1 and academic freedom. So in January of this year, the Advanced Ohio Higher Education Act was sponsored by Jerry Serrano. It's a pretty direct attack on diversity, equity, and inclusive measures in Ohio campuses. The claim is that universities have become too woke, and that wokeness is an assault on the freedom of speech, and therefore dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion is the way to fix that problem. I think the problem is that the right who sponsored this bill, they have this imaginary idea of what academia is, and they've invented this idea that's not accurate to reality. So pretty immediately, hundreds of university employees, faculty members, students all spoke out about Senate Bill 1, and they provided testimonials for why DEI is necessary, a part of campus culture. There's been protests, there's been attempts at getting it repealed, but unfortunately the bill has still gone through, and it started in July of this year. So we are already beginning to see the effects of that on campus. So what Senate Bill 1 does is the biggest concern is that it's going to remove protections that have traditionally been in place for people due to race, gender, and sexuality. And this is including recruiting practices, training, training for employees, like words like African American student, that, anything that's a group cannot be mentioned. It's going to be really difficult to kind of know how to navigate this, because we've also been instructed that veterans are not a group, but presumably, LGBTQ people are, racial groups are presumably groups. Unfortunately, one of the difficult things talking about this is that it still seems difficult to know how things are actually going to happen in the future. So we can only kind of report on, or I can only report on what we've seen so far. So the other big target of the Senate Bill 1 is of a chilling of speech for faculty instructors and adjunct instructors. So teachers on campus won't be able to talk about sensitive topics, and that can include climate change, politics, immigration, marriage, abortion, current events, and there's kind of this sense that this is going to be, we don't really, again, it's kind of hard to know how this is going to happen in classes. There's also a lot of meddling, so there's going to be a civics class, which is been instructed by the government to put out, and I guess that's going to replace what universities have traditionally provided for civics instruction. So right now, we know that students who have taken a similar class, they don't have to repeat it, but we don't know about, recent grads. Are they going to have to take this mandated civics class? There's still seems to be a lot of questions up in the air, and not a lot of guidance for faculty. So some of the fallout that we've already seen so far is that identity centers across campus have been closed. And so that's any of like the, women's centers, LGBTQ centers, multicultural. They've been shut down over the summer, and that's really a shame, because that could have been, a reason that a student might be interested in coming to a campus, and now that part of culture and communication is missing. Another fallout that we're seeing this early on in the semester is that some majors have been canceled for not meeting arbitrary standards. It's over 3 years, if a major has had less than 5 students, then it's going to be eliminated by the government without any say by the faculty members. And that's, again, a negative response, because just because a major might have a low amount of students, it could still be a very high quality major with like lots of, impassioned faculty members who are, teaching it and leading it. So we're just seeing a lot of government interference with, in campuses where the problems that have been, you already have solutions for, and the government thinks that they know better. And so here's all the identity centers that have been closed. Again, I just think that's a shame, and it's a loss for Ohio universities. What hasn't been changed, students should not be punished for controversial speech. So that seems to be something that's important in the bill, is that the threats of controversial speech seem to be more targeted towards the faculty members. There's, again, kind of this idea that maybe there's a threat of faculty teaching politics or teaching students what to think rather than how to think. And the fact that teaching politics instead of a class, in place of a class, would be academic misconduct. This is, the government is trying to address it without really knowing anything about the environment of a campus. Students are still empowered to advocate for their own education. And so I would recommend students to use their voices where they can. and you know, advocate for your own education. If faculty people can't, you know, feel like they can't teach properly, that's going to, you know, worsen everyone's education. I know that we're all of us faculty on campuses are going to do our best, but I think the students really have their own best interest to fight for themselves. I would also advocate that students should seek community outside of campus when necessary. It feels like a lot of the community that's kind of been built in place is kind of missing, you know, some of the structure that it previously had. So I would recommend, you know, finding groups outside of campus if you can, and just finding the efforts that speak to you. I provided a bunch of resources for individuals, you know, all across different spectrums of group identities. That's not really meant for any one individual type of group, because we all benefit from diversity, equity, and inclusion, regardless of what Republicans might be saying. And in my list of references here, resources here, I also have the Ohio Student Association, who has a page on their website about taking action, and that's going to give you more information about future protests against Senate Bill 1. And there's also the AAUP Center for Defense, which is a really great first aid kit for, you know, standing up to chilled speech. There's a good section there of what to do if you've been doxxed, which is another one of the concerns that faculty are feeling. So that's what I have for you today. I have some references that kind of helped me come to this speech, and yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you so much, CJ. That was really informative for myself, because I feel like amorphously have heard about all of this, right, and seen it, right. But it's good to see like it on paper, and I think it actually helps to make it a little bit less chaotic, maybe, and knowing specifically, right, those types of things. We've already talked about a lot of the risks, right, of the impact of this, right. We've already even started, as you alluded to a lot in your slides, we've already seen a lot of those risks realized, right, on campuses and things like that. But I wanted to see if we could dive a little deeper in terms of, are there any indicators for what might be the longer term impacts for this going through, and what you're kind of seeing kind of as a trend maybe on campuses and things?
I think for myself, what I really feel is threatened is like the sense of community. That's the sense of community I feel on Akron's campus has always been really important to me. You know, in the library, we work really hard to make that kind of a safe space, and I feel like that's not something I've been able to provide as much of over the summer. You know, our interest in providing, you know, diverse reading materials, we have to be a little bit more careful because we're a little bit more afraid of being targeted, you know, and like kind of being made an example of it, basically. So I think there's going to, I think it's really hard for me where I'm sitting to know what's going to happen, but I feel what I'm already feeling a loss of is a sense of community. And I know there's a lot of, you know, colleagues of mine who are, you know, still here, and they're still, you know, doing their best to, you know, provide the best service that they can despite the adversity. But I think, you know, like with the loss of the identity centers, I think we're just going to be, I just think we're going to see a lot of loss of kind of, you know, campus history and community. And, you know, at some point you can't get that back. If people do end up moving away, we have not yet seen a change in enrollment stats, but, you know, it's still pretty early to tell. And I think if this continues, you know, for too long, I think we will start to see a decline in people interested in Ohio universities.
Absolutely. Sumac, Lisa, anything that either one of you would have input on in terms of what you're seeing from your perspectives in terms of what could be potential like longer term risks and impacts from this?
Well, this is, I think, one of the things that we need to keep in mind as a point of irony, because it's important to laugh at times like this. It was just earlier this week or last week that DeWine was talking about the need for campuses to be more attractive because Ohio is facing a population decline. I know a way that we could have kept Ohio universities more attractive. They didn't seem interested in that.
That came up a lot too when there was people protesting Senate Bill 1. Like people are like, this isn't, people are going to leave Ohio universities if this is how we run our universities. So, yeah, I agree. Very ironic.
I could see that also.
One thing that I'll, oh, sorry, Joshua, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Just a quick story. As someone, I just graduated law school in May. We had the director of one of these new centers for diversity of thoughts, one of these new conservative centers, come and teach at the law school, teaching constitutional law. This is someone who had written in the past opposing gay rights, and so a lot of queer students were upset about having to take his class and protested, and were able to get an alternative section set up so they didn't have to be taught by him. But I don't think that those kind of accommodations are always going to be available, and people are going to have to unfortunately interact with people that they didn't sign up to. We didn't sign up to take classes from that person, and then all of a sudden it's being forced on us from the General Assembly. But I just wanted to share it. It was nice to see that Student Action was able to get some change made.
One of the things that I wanted to see if you had anything to provide Sumac of sensitive topics, I think was very interesting to me, and how abstract that kind of phrasing is, right? What would you say from your perspective when it comes to sensitive topics and how that's enforced, right? Do you have anything to provide in terms of insight on what your thoughts are around something like that, and what students maybe should look out for?
Thankfully, thus far, we have not seen a lot of repression directly of students and their ability to speak on these sensitive topics in the circles that I'm familiar with, with regards to it affecting their education or it affecting their like criminal sanction or anything like that. The area that's most concerning is immigration impacts, where people that's really where we're seeing people's speech be used against them to pretty horrible ends, unfortunately.
Mm. Alrighty. I think I had a couple other questions, but I feel like maybe I'll save that maybe potentially for the last section there, and we'll kind of revisit this here in a moment, because I did want to keep it moving forward, and then hand it over to you now, Sumac, for talking about this next section here on protest rights on campus.
Great, thank you, Joshua. I'm going to get my slides pulled up here, so hopefully everyone can see that now. So before I get started, I just want to make it clear to everyone that this presentation is for educational purposes. This is not legal advice. And if you ever are arrested, in general, and then as part of a protest, definitely consult with a lawyer as quickly as possible. So this is titled Know Your Rights and Risks because, as I'll talk about soon, your rights, those can be used in court to solve prior harms, but in the moment when the police are yelling at you and throwing you to the ground, your rights don't count for much. So it's important to know them, know what you can do and what you can't do. But even more important is knowing the risks that a situation presents to you based on your own personal circumstances. Like I said, those rights can be used later, but in the moment, they can't always prevent that harm that we see at protests. The purpose of this presentation is for you to understand those rights and how to use them, and be more informed when going to a protest, to know what you can expect and what the police are and are not able to do most of the time. So I'll start off with kind of preparing for protests, just general advice in case you do interact with the police. Don't bring anything that you're not comfortable having taken from you by the police and that you might not get back. A really important thing to know with your phone is to only use a passcode when you're going to a protest. Don't use fingerprint or Face ID, because the police need a warrant. They need a search warrant to access your phone using your passcode. If you have Face ID set up, they can just take your phone and hold it up to your face and it's open. And then they can access what's inside because it's unlocked. So if it's just a passcode, they need a judge's approval to access your phone then. More generally, I wanted to reference specifically masks are something that we've seen a crackdown on in legislation in the last couple of years. Obviously, in the ongoing pandemic, that's important to be considerate of the risk of the spreading disease. But at the same time, states and the national government have considered legislation to make it a crime to wear a mask, quote unquote, at a riot. So I think it's always good practice to wear masks for health reasons and for privacy reasons at protests, but you have to be aware of the danger that could put you in certain states, like I said. Beyond what you should bring, there's also what you should plan beforehand. You want to know, worst case scenario, if I get arrested, who knows where I am right now? Who can I contact over the phone? And here you can see it says 4 days right there. If you have pets and no one else to care for them, if you were to get arrested and you were in jail over a long weekend, you didn't get out until 4 days later, who is it that can be able to, care for your animals, your plants, who knows what? That depends on what kind of protest you're going to. Not every protest is going to result in arrests. Most result in none, but some are more dangerous than others. I'll cover that a bit later. So that's how to, and one last thing, contact information. So like I said, you need to know who you need to contact. Friends, family member, whoever it is that's going to be feeding your cat, you'll want to have their number. And the National Lawyers Guild, we also have a jail support hotline. You can see the number on the screen right now. That's something you can just write on your arm. We always give that out at protests when there's a risk of arrest. Last thing, when you're preparing for that protest, if you're involved in organizing, we always urge to use encrypted communication. I'm sure you've seen the news that ICE has been using technology to be able to crack these encryptions, but as of right now, this is kind of the best thing that we have. I'm not a technology expert, so I would go so far as to recommend any platforms other than the ones that I use. So once you're at the protest, here are examples of things that you can do within certain constraints. So, I mean, obviously you can walk around, you can speak, you can use your free speech, holding signs. Where you are able to stand, for example, in the street, in a crosswalk, on the sidewalk, it depends. Certain protests, it's not legal to enter the street, but you can be in a crosswalk. The police can kind of hassle you and push you out of it, get you back onto the sidewalk. You want to make sure that you're aware of where the protest organizers are trying to have people and where the police are explicitly telling people they're not able to stand if they are making orders. Also, when you're taking pictures or videos, you're always able to do that in a public area. If it's a private area, there may be some restrictions on that, but the police are not able to stop you from filming the police. You have a right to film them. Yeah, like I just said, the last thing on taking photos and videos, the police can't delete those photos and videos that you take. Like I said, you don't want them to be able to access your phone, but even if they can, they're not able to delete evidence of whatever you were capturing. When you're at a protest, for your own health and safety, in addition to your ability to avoid being arrested, it's important to be aware of your surroundings. For those of us that have legal observed with the National Lawyers Guild, we attend a lot of protests and watch the police, and you can usually start to tell when the police are ramping up to take some kind of aggressive action. So you want to be aware of where they are, how many of them there are. This isn't something that you need to focus on at all times. Obviously, you want to listen to speakers, follow the march, etc. But when the police are there, it's always good to know where they are. If you were in a room with a tiger, you would want to keep an eye on it. So I think it's always good advice. When you are interacting with the police, the first rule of thumb, you hope that you're not interacting with the police. You don't want to speak with them. No good can come from it. If they come up to you, you don't have to interact with them. If they ask how your day is, you don't have to say anything to them, whatever your comfort level is. But if they're coming up and asking you questions, you don't have to answer them, and you're free to leave. As far as keeping an eye on the police and their behavior, I've listed some types of arrests that we can see at protests on the left here. the targeted arrest, this is something that we usually see for organizers specifically, people who are involved in the protest, speakers, leaders, people that the police are targeting specifically. If you see that happening, you might want to let people know. If you see that happening to you, might want to consider leaving because police, when you see them whispering to one another and pointing at someone, I've seen that happen. A minute later, they're grabbing that person and taking them into custody. Slow-mo arrest, that's something where they do to crowds. So they'll say, they'll do a dispersal order. They say, everyone, leave the area. They might make that order every minute for 10 minutes. And then at the 10th time they do it, they'll start arresting people. So it's an example of actions by the police that aren't immediate, but they are letting you know, we're considering starting to make arrests here. The last kind, the chaotic arrests, this we saw this a lot in the summer of 2020 when the police are shouting orders that are contradictory. You don't know what to do. They're shooting off tear gas. These are the kind of the most dangerous and unpredictable types of protests. I don't usually see these at student protests. I attended a lot of SB1 type protests. Campus police tend to be much more hands-off, much less militarized. But for those of us that remember the Gaza encampment protests of spring of 2024, that was an exception where the police were very violent and militarized on campus across the state. So it's important, like I said, to be aware of the police and how they're acting, the different ways that they act. So those are the risks and kind of how you should think about behaving and what to watch for. Now we're going to move on to the rights that you have as a protest. You can see the 4 of them listed now. These are the 4 rights that you have to remember when you are at a protest. I'll start with your speech. So like I said earlier, if the police come and try and talk with you, you don't have to talk with them. You have the right to remain silent. There is, under Ohio law, they're able to ask you your name, your address, and your date of birth. If they're ordering you to give that to them repeatedly, you have to give them that information, or you can be subject to a misdemeanor charge. But anything beyond that, you don't have to share with them. Where are you going? Where did you come from? Where did you park? Who's with you? These are all the kind of questions that should raise alarms for you, that the police are trying to gather information about you. You can give, like I said, those 3 pieces of information. I would never give anything more than that. I've seen, people often try and explain to the police to say, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong. Let me explain what happened. I've seen so many instances of that happening, and people take a winnable case against them, and it gets flushed down the drain because they thought they could talk their way out of something. So when in doubt, invoke your right to remain silent. So say out loud, I'm invoking my right to remain silent. I'm going to stay silent. There's no magic words. You just need to say you're not going to talk. Searches. So once you've invoked your right to silence, the police, if they're going to arrest you or considering arrest you, they may ask for your consent to search you. Once you consent to it, anything they do search-wise is fine. So do not consent to a search of your body. That doesn't mean if the police are trying to search you, like resist physically, because that can make the situation much worse, but just orally say, I'm not consenting to being searched. The police at protests, they basically never have warrants to do searches. If they arrest someone, they're going to search them, but if they have reasonable suspicion of a crime, they are able to pat you down. Stop and frisk, I'm sure, is a term that many people have heard. So they're similar to TSA. They can kind of pat you down over the clothes. They can start going through your pockets and feeling things, but under case law, they are able to search for weapons in a quick over the clothes kind of over your outerwear kind of way. Anything beyond that, they need more probable cause and ideally a warrant. But like I said, it's very rare to see those at protests. Yes. This all changes if you're in a car, which is something I always say. If you're going to a protest, the most dangerous time is often for arrest between the protest and your car. We've seen a lot of arrests happen that way. Once you get to your car, if they try and search you, they can search the entire car, the trunk, everything in it. Cars are much easier to search than people because courts have said they're mobile, so evidence can be destroyed easily. So we want police to be able to search them. Unfortunately, for you, that means if the police are interacting with you and you're in your car after a protest and you had anything in there that the police could have a problem with, an open container, the state laws around marijuana storage in your car, even though it's legal, are in flux right now. So anything untoward that the police might find, don't put it in your car if you're about to go to a protest. Yeah, we already touched on cell phones. Your right to leave. So this is the third one that we're going to touch on. If the police are trying to detain you, if you feel like the police are coming around you, asking you questions, making you feel like you're not sure if you're able to leave, ask them, am I free to go? The police want you to be unsure about this. Just keep asking, am I free to go? If they say yes, just leave, just walk away. That is the best chance, because if you stick around, things could only get worse. And if they say no, then you are in detention and likely on the way to arrest. So this is something that you really want to know, because like I said, the police can only benefit from confusion and a lack of surety on your part. So you want to know whether or not you're free to leave. They want you to think that they're considering letting you go. Just one last question. This is something that you really want to make sure is clear when you're speaking with them. As I said earlier, if they say no, you might be subject to arrest. Invoke your right to remain silent and ask for a lawyer. That's the fourth right that we're about to speak about, the right to an attorney. So if you're not under arrest, you don't have the right to an attorney, nothing's happening. But once you are under arrest, you're going to want to invoke that right to remain silent, and you want to invoke your right to an attorney. You want to say out loud in that order, invoking my right to remain silent, and I would like to speak to an attorney. Again, these aren't magic words, so you don't need to remember exactly how to say them. Just generally, you want to say the words remain silent and attorney, lawyer, something like that. We've seen cases where someone can say something like, maybe I should get an attorney. And the courts say, that's not clear enough that the person wants one. So you really want to be clear when you say, I would like to speak to an attorney. Language of that kind. Once you are detained, we have that jail support hotline. Once you're detained, call the hotline, try and get in touch with an attorney if you have one, if you know one. But once you've invoked that right, what the police are able to do to you in the meantime is reduced. So we're trying to get that right invoked as quickly as possible. If you are in the process of dealing with the police, whether or not you're under arrest, you want to remain calm. You don't have to be super respectful to them, but you also don't want to engage in things that could aggravate the situation. Keep an eye on your surroundings, what's going on around you, the badge numbers, names of what's happening. If you're able to write that down, it can be very helpful later to your attorneys. And then you also want to make sure that people around you, your friends, your family, if they're at that protest, are aware of where you are and what's going on. At the bottom there, don't sign anything without discussing it with a lawyer. The police will often ask you to sign something waiving your rights, just so they can talk, so we can explain this whole thing, get it resolved, they might say. Definitely don't sign anything like that. I think that's my last slide. Let me make sure. But yeah, those are kind of the short and sweet of protest rights. These trainings usually take a bit longer, so I may have skipped over some stuff, but I'm looking forward to hearing any questions.
Thank you very much, Sumac. That was all really interesting as well, and really excited, or not excited maybe, but grateful to learn that information there too. I think we'll go to the third section there, and before we go to the Q&A, and where I may have a couple of follow-up questions from the different sections there. As a reminder, there's a link in the chat where we'll be able to go ahead and you'll be able to go ahead and ask questions for the Q&A section here coming up. But next, I want to go ahead and give it to Lise for talking about reproductive rights and health access in Ohio.
All right. Thanks, Joshua. My name's Lise Regula, and I'm speaking from my Ohio Equal Rights hat with the information that I have in other spaces. And, this is going to be the shortest component, and it's the most distinct from the others, in part because it's college. College students, you might need, or you might know someone who needs some of these access to information or resources. So we want to make sure that you have that in case you do. And also because some of these are not necessarily in flux as much as people seem to think that they are, but there are a number of misconceptions, and there are some potential changes coming on the horizon. So we want to make sure that folks have that information. There we go. First and foremost, in 2023, Ohio, kind of surprisingly, enshrined abortion access in our state constitution. Go us. That was a huge win, and it means that we have a constitutional right to access abortion care here. Not everybody in the legislature likes that fact. And there have been a number of attempts to push the limits on how people are able to exercise their rights, especially around the 24-hour waiting period. The 24-hour waiting period might be coming up again, and this would essentially mean that you cannot go into a clinic and have an unwanted pregnancy dealt with. You have to have that waiting period. Anybody who has taken sex ed, human biology, health classes probably understands that time is of the essence, and more time that passes during a pregnancy, the more physical recuperation is going to be required after that pregnancy ends. So delays here, not good for the pregnant person or the potentially pregnant person. On the bright side to that, mifepristone and Plan B, legal, protected structures. Plan B is actually legal and over the counter. This is something that I recommend folks have on hand along with naloxone as emergency preparedness stuff, especially within college spaces and with the increase in poisonings that have been happening due to substances, legal and illegal. It's important to have protection in case something happens. Better to be able to deal with things sooner rather than later. The biggest issue around access comes into play when we talk about Medicaid and who's able to pay for access to these things. With the budget that was passed earlier this summer, we're going to see more restrictions, although there is litigation in process at this time. I realize that this is not the case for everybody, and it's a privilege to be able to have access to those things. But if you can get on private insurance, either through your employer, a partner's employer, your parents, that takes away one layer of uncertainty or one layer of challenge in accessing important reproductive care. So again, not everybody's going to have that as an option, but if you do, it might give you a little bit more peace of mind to have that as opposed to relying on Medicaid if you're in a position to do so. Here in Ohio, we do also have a number of resources, places to go for these services. Again, because time is of the essence, it is important to be aware of crisis pregnancy centers. Because I'm screen sharing, I can't see hands really easily, and I like in audience participation, so my apologies. Feel free to shout it out. Is anybody familiar with what a crisis pregnancy center is? Anybody want to define it?
I will. It's fake bullshit that pretends to be an abortion care center that's run by largely religious organizations.
Yes. Or to lean on my prior career in education, it's a distractor. Here in Ohio, and you guys will have access to these slides after the presentation. So all of these are active links except for the name that's listed up here that is a crisis pregnancy center. Anybody want to take a guess at which is the distractor? I won't make you wait too long. It's the Women's Care Center. The others of these provide services to some extent. The Franklin County Law Library is on there because it does give detailed, in-depth descriptions of what the legal status is right now. And that link does go specifically to their abortion access and care portion of their law library. Not all of these are distinct to Ohio. Some of these, like Abortion Finder, I Need an A, and Hey Jane, are accessible outside of Ohio as well. So if you are going home for the summer to someplace outside of Ohio, some of these will still be relevant, but trying to keep it Ohio focused. Like I said, this was going to be the shortest, and I made do on that promise. Just wrapping things up because we are getting close to time and we want to be respectful of folks' time. The link to the question form that is anonymous will stay active for a few days after this presentation. So feel free, if something comes up, if you wake up at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning and are like, I really should have asked this question, you can still ask that question. We'll be collating all of those answers anonymously to go out with the resources after the fact so that questions that come up, people have that documentation. And, even though you asked it in an anonymous format, you're still going to be able to get the answer, and that question will benefit everybody else who is here today. Additionally, recording of the event will go out. That link will stay active until the 28th. So that's kind of your due date for questions. And a few actions that you can take. We will be including a extended Know Your Rights document. That's a great place for additional information. Like folks have said before, good actions to take in stressful times. Build and maintain your support circle. Make sure that you have people to ask questions to, talk about big feelings, and who have your back in cases of emergency. And all of the presenters that are here today and the organizations that we're a part of, feel free to reach out. We're here for the community. This OSU specific one, there's actually been discussion that the OSU chalk bans may actually be in violation of state code. So this was brought up by staffer that it would be interesting for a student group to submit a complaint and go through that hearing process. Just an idea, not telling anybody to or to not, but things to think about. I want to thank the presenters that were here today, thank all of the attendees that were here today, as well as our ASL interpreter. You guys have helped make the community a little bit stronger and helped to make sure that we're all better equipped for these trying times. Now, any questions?
Please, I decided to submit a couple of the questions that I had through the link there. So I can't, I wrote it, but I am no longer able to eloquently recite what I just put. So my questions are over there if you can see them.
Yes. The first question, how can law students get involved with the National Lawyers Guild?
That's a great question. So I can answer that one. I was just a law student and the president of my local chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. Yeah, if you are at a school if you are currently at one, if you're applying to one, thinking about it, check to see if they have a chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. I know most law schools in Ohio do. And if you are going to a law school that does not have a National Lawyers Guild chapter, you should start one. So you should definitely contact, assuming that's in Ohio, contact the Ohio NLG. We'll give you all the resources, advice, local connections that you could need with attorneys and non-attorneys to get something like that started. And if you're in a different state, look to see if there's a National Lawyers Guild chapter in that state. Oh, and then it looks like Liz threw some helpful links in the chat there, including for Ohio NLG.
Awesome. Thanks, Sumac. The next question that was submitted, as we discuss the empowering role of protest in helping individuals and communities engage with important issues, what additional considerations should be made for communities such as trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming individuals who are facing targeted legal violence? And I think we could probably add people of color and potentially immigrants to that list as well.
I can address that, but I also welcome anyone else, obviously, because this is a very broad question for people who have experienced protest. So I'll take those identities kind of in turn, where the easiest one to answer is people who are not citizens. So anyone who is not a US born or a naturalized citizen. No one has been denaturalized by the current administration, despite some threats by that. So if you're not a citizen, whether you're undocumented, green card holder, temporary visa, student visa, working visa, any of those things, you are at heightened risks when attending protests, when engaging in politicized speech. We've seen students arrested for, publishing op-eds, arrested by immigration enforcement, not by the police. And so if you are not a citizen, you have to be aware that engaging in speech that your state or national government disagrees with can bring immigration-related risks. We have millions and millions of non-citizens in this country, and a pretty small number of them have been arrested for that politicized speech, and we've seen their names. Mahmoud Khalil is a famous example. And so the risks are not enormous, where that's not the main way that people who are not citizens are being arrested. Meaning protests are not the main way that those arrests are happening, but they do happen, so it's something to be aware of. For members of the queer community, such as myself, I love participating in trans and LGBTQ related protests. I know some great groups that do that. The police, in my experience, don't target queer people specifically at protests. The concern for queer people is if you are arrested, you're going to spend time in a jail that is for people that does not match your gender identity. That can be an incredibly jail stressful and horrible for everyone, but it can be incredibly particularly stressful and horrible for queer people. You won't have access to medication. You'll be, could be surrounded by guards and other people that are also incarcerated that are not treating you very nice. I have worked with several trans clients who were incarcerated, not for protests, but just for other things. And they've honestly shared mixed feelings about being in jail. Obviously there's a lot of negative elements, but they also say that, a lot of people in there are just trying to get through the experience and they're not trying to hassle you. So it's definitely something to be aware of. But similar to how most people in the country are cool with trans people, most people in jail are going to be cool with trans people. But the few that are not could be a real problem since you cannot leave. So that's something to be aware of. But as far as being targeted in protests, I haven't seen, trans or queer presenting people being hassled more than certainly people of color, protest organizers, other targeted groups.
I would like to add some thoughts. I would say be aware of intersectionality. When you're at a protest, if you're white, I'm queer as well. But when I'm at a protest and I'm white, I make sure to put myself in between where like the cops are and where people of color are, and just kind of use my whiteness as like a shield almost. So like your privileges and your can mean different things in different situations. I would say also to look out for your queer friends, and also your people, your friends of color, your friends who are you know not from this country, but like in particular, keep a lookout for trans people, for queer people, because there is a lot of rhetoric against that identity right now, and kind of a lot of scary language going around. In Ohio, also, I didn't get to talk about it because I don't know a lot about it, but we've got this bathroom bill on campus as well that like that you have to match your birth gender for the toilet. So I would also suggest a big helping of mind your own business. If you see somebody in the toilet that you don't think belongs there, no, you didn't. That'd be my advice about that. So that's my thought.
Thanks. And then the last question that was submitted through the form is, in light of the DEI ban from SB1, how do you envision diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts evolving on college campuses? Is there still a viable path for DEI work to continue in some form that supports building the kind of inclusive community we've discussed as essential to campus life?
I'll go ahead and try to answer this one, since DEI was kind of my topic. And unfortunately, right now, I don't know how safe it is to be thinking about DEI in terms of the campus community, which is why I was kind of trying to advocate for just creating that community outside of the campus structure, because I don't think there's a way to proceed, just in community higher education in general, but like also just I feel like humanity needs diversity to thrive. Like this is how we get ideas shared. This is how we have our community. I can't imagine a world without making space for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if it's not safe to do so on campus, I think you got to do so off campus. So I think until it's safe to do so in higher ed again, we'll just have to make our community elsewhere. Unfortunately, that's my answer, but I am not the lawyer of the group. So maybe there'll be better answers by other people later.
Also not a lawyer, but I can speak to a little bit of experience. We have a scholarship that had been established in my husband's honor at Ohio University. And it was specifically meant to benefit people within the LGBTQ community. And the advice that we got when SB1 was passed and we knew we were going to have to be getting through this process from the development and from the lawyers at the university was actually to take advantage of the fact that students have in some ways more rights than faculty under SB1. So instead of saying, okay, the recipient of the scholarship should be from this community, it was, well, they should be aligned with, we picked an organization that was for LGBTQ students through the student organization, student involvement, and said, well, it should be a student who has had a history with this group. So essentially encouraging students to get involved in those student-run activities, and taking advantage of the privilege that SB1 builds in for students.
One thing that I'll add is in my final semester at law school, the professor or dean was sent a letter from the Undersecretary of Education directing them, about the new implications of the federal education policy. the anti-DEI policies that the Trump administration put forth. And we had a discussion around compliance with that. The federal government can say, or and the state government can say all that they want that you can't do, but they have to enforce that. They have to know that you're doing it. They have to have some kind of action brought against you, and then they have to enforce that that action, take it to court or something like that. The hardest part of that is them finding out what you're doing. You can't use race when determining admittance, or you can't have racial identity be a factor in student groups. But how are they going to prove that you did use race as a factor when admitting students, or that you used race as a factor when students are engaged in some kind of collective organization on campus? So they can say all these things, but it's really hard for them to enforce that from Washington or from Columbus. I'm not directing anyone to break the law. I'm just saying that the letter of the law and the enforcement of the law are two very different things. And so don't engage in preemptive compliance with something because you don't know whether that's whether the actions that you're already engaged in are actually things that you need to stop. And I would figure that out before you do stop things that you're engaged in.
Yeah, that was a really good point there. That preemptive kind of compliance is what we saw, I think, right, happen, and the negative impact of that, right, it was really, really important, and I think that galvanized a lot of students across the state of Ohio when that started to happen, because we're like, no, this is not, you're not going to erase our communities, right, and so I think that was really an important point to make. Okay, well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are at time here, over time. So thank you so much again to all of our panelists. Thank you to Cincinnati State Interpreter Training, ASL Interpreter Training Program in Amberley for being here. And thank you to all the folks that were able to attend and listen in and watch in. We posted a couple of links in the chat there, some websites for the NLG and for the Ohio Equal Rights work that we're doing. Lisa already mentioned and talked about how the forum that will be open there still for a couple more days, and then sharing this out as a follow-up to all the attendees as well. So once again, thank you to everybody for being here. If you want to get involved with the work that Ohio Equal Rights is doing, please visit that second link. Especially, we would love to be able to have you and help and have your help and assistance and expertise in the work that we're doing here to try and build a better Ohio for all of us. And so once again, thank you everybody for being here, and I hope everybody has a great evening and weekend.